Hello, my name is Hanna Petros. I am the daughter of prisoners of conscience Petros Solomon and Aster Yohannes. The story I want to share with you today is mine, but it is also the story of many of my fellow brothers and sisters who are not fortunate enough to find a safe country where they can live a peaceful, dignified life without fear in an abusive environment. My parents, Petros Solomon and Aster Yohannes, were freedom fighters for independence of Eritrea. Like many at that time, they believed in freedom, justice, and rule of law. On September 18, 2001, my father and other 11 senior higher officials were detained just for demanding democratic reform. My mother, during my father's detention, she was in the U.S. to pursue her education. When she heard of my father's imprisonment, she was distraught. Afraid that her children were going to grow up without their parents, she tried to obtain passport and exit visas for her children to join her to the U.S. She was refused. Instead, she was granted a safe return home to join her kids. But as soon as she arrived at Asmara airport, while we were waiting to welcome her, she was betrayed and detained. Since then, we have never seen her and don't know how she is coping physically or psychologically. In the absence of my parents, me and my siblings, Simon, Zerai, and Maaza, were raised by my grandmothers. My sister was only 2 when my mom left and had just turned 4 when my dad was detained. To keep memories of our parents alive, we depend on photos and stories told us by close family members, especially our aunts. Growing up, I didn't feel sorry for myself. I was proud of my parents. They are brave people who had the courage to do what others wouldn't and stood up for what they believed in. They are my idols, a good example and role model. Although my emotions never used to falter, in later years I found myself unsure. Yes, I am proud of them for doing the right thing, but I can't help but wonder what it would be like if they were around. I see mothers and daughters sitting down with a glass of wine and giggling and sharing their day with each other. I see fathers toasting with their sons. I find myself wondering, when do I get to share my day with my mother? When do I get to enjoy my dad's laughter? On second thought, I don't even need that much. I just need a moment to tell them that I love them and that I miss them. When I turned 18, I had a life-changing decision to make. I wasn't lucky enough to worry about matching clothing, buying my first car, maybe even moving out. In my circumstances, I had to make a life or death decision. I had to leave the country. It is a sad reality when your home, the land you grew up, turns out to be an open prison. Every corner you turn there is fear and sorrow. This wasn't what my parents fought and worked for. In great caution and secrecy, my siblings and I decided to leave the country, but it was no easy task. In Eritrea, you have no right of movement from one city to another, let alone to leave the country. There is a shoot-to-kill policy if you are caught trying to cross the border. In best case scenario, you are to be imprisoned. Being children of prisoners had also put us on a blacklist. No one wanted to do anything with us, nor would anyone dare to face the repercussions of helping the family of Petros Solomon. A lot of family and friends were scared to be seen talking to us or asking about us. My siblings and I had to be extremely careful when we left home, so we faked our identities to cross the checkpoints that surrounded Asmara. On June 22, 2009, my brothers, Simon 19 and Zerai 18 and me, took a path through the desert where we would be able to avoid checkpoints. My little sister Maaza, who was 11 at the time, and my maternal grandmother Mezgab, who was 64, had to take a different route so as to avoid suspicion. That night, we had to walk for 8 hours. It was exhilarating and terrifying. We made it at our destination by dawn. That's where the smuggler's pickup truck was supposed to come. There were other people waiting at the same spot with us, hiding. In the dark, we could hear a child crying. We realized they were waiting for the smuggler's pickup to get them too. We waited all day until sometime in the afternoon. We heard gunfire, and there were military personnel everywhere. We were captured along with one of our smugglers who was bleeding and unconscious after he was tied, beaten, and stoned. 8 people, my brothers, myself, my boyfriend, now husband, 2 young men and another young woman were imprisoned and taken to the naval base. It seemed deserted, but then I realized they used all the buildings there as individual prisons. Others were kept in containers. I could hear them screaming. The men were separated from the females, and this is where I last saw my siblings. We were all interrogated, beaten by thick sticks, electricity wires, ropes, basically anything they could get their hands on. They accused my boyfriend of being the smuggler who made the deal for us. For that, his beatings were severe. What I still remember to this day is the screams of pain from the ones being interrogated. They would start late at night on purpose to torture the minds of the one listening as well. Another wave of people who were caught crossing the border joined us the next day. A group of 15 people came. 2 of those people I had developed a close relationship with. Nadia, an 18-month-old baby, and Samhar, a 12-year-old girl. On top of the brutal interrogations, we were also malnourished. In her time in prison, Nadia's mom had a miscarriage. Nadia's mom was still breastfeeding, but she didn't have any milk for her child because she was malnourished herself. To lighten up our spirits, we would joke about how Nadia would be on the Guinness Book of Records as the youngest child to attempt to cross the border. But that laughter didn't last long. In addition to our 2 groups, there was another group of people who were supposed to cross with us. This group was never found. We learned that 2 sisters from this group were eaten by hyenas. I knew this because our interrogator was boasting on how merciful he was that he saved us, how we should be grateful to him because we would have been eaten by the hyenas as well. The way we were treated made me wonder if that was a better fate. Many of us got sick there. A lot of prisoners caught donkey fever, and nobody was treated for it. The fever, the chill, diarrhea, and vomit were a normal thing at the naval base, and there was no medication or any medical help. After 3 months, we were transferred to another prison called Gadam. This was a bigger prison, so there were more women and another 8-year-old girl called Deborah. Here, for the first time, we were able to send notice to our families that we were alive for the first time. Some of the inmates' families had a funeral for their lost children. We stayed at Gadam for 3 months, and it was one of the hardest times of my life. We ate hard bread with a soup, and if you got lucky enough, it had a bit of lentil in it. Going to the restroom was a 15-minute walk in the bushes, 2 times per day, 1 in the morning and 1 before sunset. After 3 months in Gadam, again, we were all transferred to another prison called Eritrea, comparatively bigger prison where we were subjected to limitless work. We would cook for all the prisoners, wash the guards' clothes, and we were counted and recounted every hour. What troubled me the most in my time in prison was that when they took us to the toilet, which is an open space with no shelter, the men guards would start right above us. Then, without warning, they would start beating us with thick sticks to round us up. After listening to many stories of the 100 females detained there, I consider myself lucky to have made it through the interrogations with only beatings. Some were stripped naked and searched, others were raped or both. An older woman of 60 tells me she couldn't understand what the interrogator meant by searching her inside. When she refused, he beat her up, left her bruised, but conscious enough to see him put his hands inside her. Next to our hanger cell, surrounded by thorns, there was another with people accused of religious beliefs. I was shocked when I realized they were people I knew, that I thought they had left the country. All along, they were imprisoned for 4 years. Elsa, a mother of 2, and Feven, a 20-year-old, first in Wi'a and now here. Many inmates had diarrhea, and 2 died due to it. We were never told why we were here or why we were moved to 3 different prisons. But after 3 months in Eritrea, we were all sent to training camps. We were told that we would be serving our country by being officially trained. The girls were sent to Sawa and the men were sent to Kormena. This was even further away from my beloved siblings. They said they would be training us, but the only times I recall that we were actually trained was give or take 2 months. For 2 weeks we were in Sawa, but once we were kicked out to make room for the festivals, we never came back. For the next 8 months, we were taken from one farm to another to work on fields for free. I have been to Afimbol, Molaber, Mograib, and other private fields owned by generals and other officials. We got up before sunrise and worked up until noon on an empty stomach. At noon, the girls that were assigned to be cooks would have the food ready. There was no actual kitchen, so they had to stay under the sun all day and cook with wood and fire. Their faces would become dark from smoke and burn from sunlight and fire. We were allowed 1 cup of tea and half a kitcha, a sort of pizza bread. And after an hour rest, we were called to work on the fields again. Our guards would whistle 3 times. If by the 3rd time we were not in the line, we would be punished, beaten with whatever they could get their hands on, or kicked. Weekends was supposed to be our resting days, but the guards used to do business deals. They would take us to a privately owned field to work and get paid for the hands they brought in. We worked in fields of tomatoes, onions, peppers, and sorghum. If by any chance we were found with tomatoes or onions in our pockets, we were beaten for stealing. Water was not a commodity. Due to the scarcity, whatever little they gave us, we'd rather save it for our throats than use it to wash up. Throughout the whole 8 months, we were never given any beds. We slept on the ground in rain or cold. One day, after working in the fields, trucks came and started loading us up. We didn't know where we were going or why. When we reached Baruntu, they told us that we were assigned to our locations where we would serve for the military. I was assigned to Tesene. Once settled, I asked if I could go to see my family, and they wouldn't allow me because my division was supposed to go on commando training that would take another 4 months. From Tesene, we went to Kormana. There, we were treated like mates. We were asked to clean and cook for the division. After 4 months, our division was changing location to Asab. At this point, I lost all hope. It has been 2 years, and they still weren't willing to send me home. I finally pleaded with the leader of my division, and he allowed me to go home. It felt surreal. I didn't want to believe it until I got all the way home. I saw my siblings and grandmother after 2 years. It was good to be back home, but sadly it was not enough. I felt like a failure for coming back empty-handed. I felt defeated. And I knew that if I stayed, I would have to go to Asab, and who knows when I would be going home again once I got to Asab. Instead of living of fear from roundups or fear that my division would come to get me and probably put me in prison for not coming back on time, I decided to take a risk. I decided to flee the country again. This time I was prepared. I knew what to expect and what I would be facing. And to my surprise, this time I made it. Handed off from smuggler to smuggler, I made it to Sudan and from there to Ethiopia. After 2 years spent in Addis Ababa for resettlement process to US, finally I arrived in Boston to join my grandmother and little sister Maaza after 3 years of separation. This is a common story of Eritrean youth in search of freedom, which the government of Eritrea has denied us. Thank you very much.